District 26, welcome to the podcast. Today we have Zach Taylor. Zach Taylor works IT in a Fortune 100 company, and he's an outgoing area director. Today he's going to talk to us a little bit about the table topics master role. Zach, thanks very much for being with us.
Excited to be here, man.
Very cool, very cool. Now, I know you've done this role a ton of times. Out of all that you've learned doing it, what would you say stands out the most?
The key, I think, for the table topics role, aside from being one of the most scary roles, I feel like for especially the new members to volunteer for, although I've seen at other clubs where they volunteer you to do the role, kudos to those clubs. The key to that role that I've experienced is to ask questions that are universal. And I think since you're in our club, you know, there's a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds in our club. There are people from the United States. There are people from outside the United States. There are people who like sports. There are people who don't like sports. There are people who do not understand the idioms and the phrases that we use in English because we were born speaking English and these people weren't. And so a lot of the references that you might come up with for your table topics aren't necessarily universal. So when you're coming up with topics for table topics, it's really good to think of something extraordinarily universal so that you're never alienating someone, because it is key to note that if you ask somebody to answer a question and they have no experience with that, it's embarrassing for you and it's embarrassing for that person. Therefore, I think it's key to consider universality.
Oh, universality.
The nickel word.
Repen the dictionary. With that universality applied broadly, I mean, do you see that come up in other areas in Toastmasters or speaking in general, or does that help you sort of build rapport with people as well? Or
yes, I think as Toastmasters, it's really important for us to understand that everyone comes to Toastmasters for a different reason. There are some people who come in with whether it's a true sense of confidence in their speaking ability or a false sense of their speaking ability, if you know what I mean. Or those people who are coming in or the stereotypical mouse, and I'm afraid to speak in front of an audience. It's really important to understand what is motivating someone to come to Toastmasters and see if you can meet them where they are. If your ability in Toastmasters is great and you are an excellent Toastmaster and you are an orator of spectacular ability, and you come to every meeting with this wealth of knowledge and this impressive talent that you're putting on exhibit for every Toastmasters meeting, you may be speaking too much. You may be alienating the new person. You may not be greeting them or giving them evaluations above their ability, or you may just be selfishly going to Toastmasters and making it about yourself. So it's really important to understand how we're serving the Toastmasters that are coming to each meeting and understanding what it is that got them in that seat, why they keep coming back. And that all goes back to universality, which is now I'm proclaiming the theme for this meeting. Now it's come up twice.
That's nice. That's interesting because I think just about everybody, maybe not as much as me, but just about everybody gets in Toastmasters because they want to be awesome in some way, whether it's speaking or leadership or whatever. And, you know, whether they describe that as overcoming a fear or being a more competent speaker or getting promoted at their job, you know, to simplify that, to make it universal, since that's our buzzword for the day. It's another way of being awesome. It's being a better version of you, or however you like to describe it. But I think the universality is real with that, because if you keep in mind, because you will be more awesome if you spend more time at Toastmasters, you're going to get better at all these things. Sometimes you're going to get better at things you're not even planning to, just because the opportunity arises, and maybe you just want to help someone else out or be a good member of the club, and then you end up getting a lot of skills you didn't plan on. One piece of that, I think, is just recognizing that however far you go or however good you get, a piece of the club experience is going to always be, assuming it's a living club, being with people that have just been there for maybe a month or a year, or this is their first meeting, and what's that like? And, am I really serving those people with trying to, wow them with every communication I give? Or can I just shut up and actually listen and just pay attention and, let them know that, I want them to succeed in the club as well. I've already gotten to be a little more awesome the way I wanted to. I now want them to have the chance to be a little more awesome. And you took that in a very interesting place. So universality, I liked it even better once you arrived there with it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Do you have anything that stands out as a particularly interesting story from the Table Topics master role?
Well, Ben, as you know, in our club, as I alluded to, we have trouble getting people to take the Toastmaster role. And I think there was a 2 or 3 year stretch where, let's say I was 90% of the time, I was the Table Topics master at every single meeting. And some of you out there who are listening to this will remember very well the COVID thing that hit. And then suddenly our attendance dropped. And Ben knows because he's in our club. But we got to a point where there was maybe 3 people showing up per meeting, maybe. And in that, you had to perform roles every single time. And you generally just had to do what it took to keep it going. So I think the most memorable Toastmaster experience for Table Topics that I've ever that I remember looking back was being Table Topics over and over and over for years and getting really, really into what drives it. When I first started out at Table Topics, I treated it like I would a person who came to my house. I would expect them to have some familiarization with myself. I would expect that they were familiar with my neighborhood because they were in my house. Some sort of back and forth would arise pretty organically with people in my early Table Topic sessions, unless they weren't from the background that I assumed automatically. And so it got pretty awkward when, if I was to say your favorite sports team, and they would answer me with, I don't like sports ball, or I would ask what they think of camping, and then they would say, well, we don't camp much where I'm from in India, or whatever thing I assumed that they were automatically coming from, they brought to the table, and then they could relate to my questions. I quickly realized that wasn't the case. And then the other thing I wanted to say really briefly is the yes and no answers, the binaries. Mm-hmm. If you were to ask somebody, do you like this movie? And they go, no. And then they have nothing else to say. Or even, do you know how to play the Table Topics exercise? Do you know what's expected of you? You should know that you should go for at least a minute, and you should go for no more than 2 minutes and a half. And a lot of times guests weren't necessarily apprised of the situation. So early on, I learned, be very generous with your questions, make them open-ended, and explain the rules of Table Topics, and also explain it's okay to fail if you cannot come up with a minute explanation of the question that you were asked. That's completely fine. We're Toastmasters. You're here to improve. You're not here to be on stage and to necessarily nail it on your first time. It's all a learning experience. And that, I think, encapsulates a lot of the early things that I learned in as the Table Topics master for multiple upon multiple sessions during those COVID years.
It was quite a few sessions, I do recall.
Yeah.
That's also very useful, getting down to some of the actual drivers of the role, to get down to, what's coming up and how you handle what's coming up. And that's absolutely recognizing that not everybody has the same background. I've definitely run across that issue with a variety of questions I've asked for that role, or things I've come up with in other areas. One of the good things about it is trying to go for more universality, where everybody's got stories, at least as far as I've heard. Everybody world round has stories. That's a universal. Not everything, loving sports and camping, not universal. So there, you can always go for the deeper thing, and maybe there's a possible way you could make camping universal. Like, you could say something more general as in just getting out in nature. Again, I'd have to workshop that one, but those having those conversations allows you to get a little closer to that, to see, you know, what you can actually say that's going to land with the most possible people that are going to be at that meeting. It's a very powerful experience. And again, it sounds like it was a very repetitive experience, but it sounds like you got a lot out of it.
It did. If you want to really master something, do it to the point of boredom and back. And what I mean is, I dreaded the role, but after a long time of just repeatedly doing it, I found insights that I probably wouldn't have had I not continuously done the role over and over. And one of those things that I learned that I'd like to share with the audience, if you may,
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
you would, is what drives us to become good at table topics. It's not necessarily obvious. I think what's obvious is that we have this meeting and we have to fill it with some amount of time. You don't have 2, 3, 4 speakers, then you have to have an exercise that someone can do every meeting. And so that's probably the obvious thing. But what table topics truly gets you good at, first from the perspective of the person participating, not in the role, but just answering the question, is if you come to our office at any given day and your boss's boss or some director somewhere is visiting the office, and then they corner you and they say, "Hey, Ben, tell me your story." For a lot of people, they're so terrified of public speaking that they can't even do these one-on-one small talk interactions. And as time goes on, small talk is becoming a skill that is really being lost. Table topics as a participant is helping us to be able to answer the director's questions about who you are, and keeping small talk. And you can extrapolate that beyond work and say the dinner party, the church, the PTA. Just being able to communicate with people you find on the street can be a very powerful, life-changing thing if you take table topics seriously. And then the other side of the coin that I wanted to bring up really quick is why one should get good at the role. Now imagine you are the director of your company, and hopefully in Toastmasters, you do aspire to be a leader of some sort in whatever medium that is, whether that be at work, church, your house, whatever. You will have to lead people, and a lot of that is having the skills to be able to talk to anyone on the street and getting them to open up to you and express their thoughts and feelings and what motivates them, and getting to know them. Being good at the table topics role is training that skill of leadership on the most basic level. Hey, I've not met you. This is our first time. I have been the table topics master so many times that I am so good at just getting to know anyone because I've got all of these questions in my experience as the table topics role. And that, I think, is the unobvious reason that is such a good thing to do the role over and over and over and get really good at it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you said a lot of interesting things there, but two that really stuck out for me. You know, anytime you're doing a role, and you can start to see this regardless of what role it is, there's the two sides of it, right? Are you just being the person who's coming up with questions, or are you actually a person who's facilitating some part of the meeting now? And that gives you more insight into the people that are answering the questions. And you can kind of do that both ways. Once you've done both, it's very easy to show up to table topics and how can I make this an interesting response for the table topics master? Or how can I make the table topics master's job easier? And you get both sides of that dynamic in the meeting and outside of the meeting, like you were mentioning, where you might be an employee who's uncomfortable just talking extemporaneously. You also might be a manager who wants to realizes a lot of people are in that place and wants to facilitate them talking extemporaneously a little bit better. So that's very powerful. And one of the things you said early on was, I think you said out to boredom and back. That was a interesting journey, description. And I've found that a lot of things, it's not always boredom you get to. Sometimes it's pain or any other kind of discomfort, but to where you can get to face the thing you don't want to face. And in some instances, it is boredom, particularly, post-COVID. Boredom doesn't come up uncommonly in this world, but you go to that uncomfortable place. And then once you get beyond it, it's something else. And then when you come back, it's a new world. Or at least it may be the same world, but it's a world where you have something new to offer in your life and in, those that are willing to hear. So very powerful stuff, Zach.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think this podcast is a really interesting medium. I'm looking forward to seeing where you take this, and I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more of the Toastmasters podcasting experience, because I think it's just something that's the way of the future. So congratulations to you, Ben.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, that's all for today. Zach, thanks for being here. Have a good one.
Thank you.